Today, I've been asked to come here and talk about customer needs, consumer needs, demand, all that good stuff. Right? This is a topic I love talking about with others because it involves so many other exciting fields of study that I also like to investigate. Fields like psychology, cybernetics, complexity, systems, so on, right? All of these kind of contribute, I believe, to a really important understanding of what motivates people to go out and adopt and use products. Now, I've got really good news for everybody. That is, the answer to what customers want, how do we think about needs, how do we communicate those needs, it's very simple, really. It comes down to two things. On the one hand, you've got the environments that people want to create and maintain for themselves. And on the other hand, you've got constraints, right? Things that get in the way and block and make it hard for people to create and maintain these environments that they want to have for themselves. And when those two collide and come together, it creates this emergent phenomenon of needs. So, to give you an idea, if I want to visualize this in my mind, this is how I think about it, right? You've got desired environment, right, that we want to create for ourselves, and then our situated constraints, and they clash together, they smash. And then the output needs, and of course other behavior, right? You know, shopping, I'm going to look for something different. Maybe reinvention, okay, well, I need something, so I'm going to mess around with what I have and maybe try to tweak it a little bit. And so this is how I think about, how needs are created and how we, should think about it and communicate with others. Now, I think for most people, the idea of situated constraints, that's pretty straightforward, right? Constraints are just things that get in our way, right? Where maybe people are not so familiar with is the idea of environments. So that's what I'm going to kind of start off with today and spend most of my time today talking about, environments. Like, what does that mean when consumers are aspiring to create and maintain certain environments for themselves? And how is this different than outcomes? And what's that relationship between outcomes and environments? All right, so I'll begin. I believe the story of environments is very fascinating, actually. A place that I like to begin is with Singer. Singer was a philosopher of science who lived late 19th century, early 20th century, and he did something quite revolutionary. Actually, it was a revolutionary. He changed science forever. See, up until this point, when he started writing in the 1890s, science was done, it was approached in a very, they call it billiard ball cause and effect, right? Meaning, like, if I'm holding the pool stick and I hit it, it hits the cue ball, which hits the 3 ball, which goes into the pocket, right? So very simple cause and effect. This was how science was done for hundreds and hundreds of years, right, or thought about. But he proved that that's not how the world works. Now, he did this actually through a long, complicated proof, which I'm not going to go through today, right? I doubt anyone here wants to hear me go through 10 minutes of a mathematical proof. So I'll give you the illustrative version of what he showed. It goes like this. If I plant an acorn in the ground, is the outcome an oak? Right. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, it's probably a trick question in there, right? So I'll make it easier. If I plant an acorn in the ground, will that cause an oak? Or if I plant an acorn in the Sahara Desert, will that create an oak? How about if I do it at the bottom of the ocean or an iceberg? Well, those actions that I do create the outcome of an oak. Now, I think intuitively we all know, of course not, right? Well, why not? Well, it's because actually planting an acorn in the ground is not enough. You actually need an environment of things working together in order to grow that oak and allow it to flourish. Things like nutrients in the soil, moisture content in the soil, humidity in the air, sunlight, not too much, not too little. All those things must work together to create that oak. So that's the first thing that Singer pointed out. Second thing he illustrated is that, well, now that we've moved away from cause and effect to environments producing outcomes, then you can't really give fault or blame to any one particular contributor to those outcomes. So like, for example, suppose I do plant an acorn in the ground and it becomes an oak. Can I take credit for that? Can I say, I made that oak tree? Of course not. But the inverse is true as well. If I plant an oak tree, or an acorn, and it doesn't create an oak, is it my fault? So those are the two things that were really huge impact on how people thought about the world and understanding the world, right? You need environments of things all working together to produce outcomes, but also that if you do or don't get a certain outcome, you can't really blame or give credit to one particular factor of that. All right, so this idea of environments caught on. And the next person to introduce it, thinking, was Walter Shewhart. He was a mathematician working at Bell Labs, and he thought about, okay, it's interesting, environments, and so he brought that thinking to manufacturing. And he also revolutionized manufacturing. Talk to anyone who's familiar with quality control or running plants, and they probably may not remember Shewhart, but they'll be like, oh yeah, I was supposed to study that guy at some point in school. So that was it. So how did he revolutionize manufacturing? He did it by introducing this. This is the control chart. What this is describing is the environment of the manufacturing process. And it's sampling important variables of that manufacturing process to try to figure out which things are out of scope and which things are in scope. But also things like trends that are telling us maybe something is wrong, that something's off. Because Shewhart from Singer recognized that focusing on the outputs and the outcomes of our manufacturing processes, well, that's too late, right? You've already made the product, and so if it's no good, it's too late. It's difficult to figure out what the problem is, because then you have to work backwards and figure out, okay, well, why was this lot of telephones no good? That's maybe a little hard to figure out. So instead, if you want to get the outcomes and outputs that you want, you have to create and facilitate the right environment and monitor that continuously. So that's Shewhart. Next thing, right? Deming. So Deming then also took Shewhart's ideas and Singer's ideas. So also, Deming was a protege, I guess you would say, of Shewhart. They worked together. Deming applied this idea of environments to management, right? And so I think this quote illustrates Deming quite well, right? We should work on our processes, not the outcomes of our processes. Right? Same thing. Focus on the environment and the certain processes in that environment, right? And then if you take care of that, you'll get the outcomes you want. All right, so I've been going on for 10 minutes. Some of you might be thinking, oh, thanks for the history lesson. All very fascinating, thank you. But what does that have to do with customer needs and design? How is that relevant to us, to my work? Well, I'm going to argue that this is immeasurably relevant and important to your work. And actually, I have been talking about needs all this time. So I'll bring it back to this. Have any of you seen something like this before? Right? Okay, I saw some hands going up. Actually, let me change that question. You have seen this before, right? Does anyone know what that is? Can you describe? Oh, sorry, I go back. Put too much. Customer journey map. See, what we're describing here is a manufacturing environment and sampling that over time and testing for certain variables. Okay, are they in scope, out of scope? Same thing for customer journey map. You're describing an environment for which a consumer is interacting with a brand or a product, continuously sampling that experience, those important variables, and seeing are they in scope or are they out of scope, right? Because this is very helpful to figuring out, okay, well, where are they running into problems, where are they unhappy, where are maybe huge swings in the experience. And again, same thing. Instead of just waiting for the customer to, so similar here, right? The reason why this was so useful to manufacturers that they could anticipate problems, right? They could say, okay, here on August 18th, right, or in this month, right, April and May, we had this time where the manufacturing process was really acting really odd. They can anticipate that the outputs, that whatever widgets they're making are going to have defects. So same thing here. You can get ahead of the customer and think, oh, okay, they're having a bad experience in here. Even before they leave your product or they start complaining, you can anticipate that they're probably going to complain or be unhappy about this. All right, so that's at a high level, the idea of environments. Now I want to go a little deeper into it. Talk about environments versus outcomes. So I'm going to use the Brexit example when describing outcomes and also comparing that with environments. All right, so I don't have to explain this. I mean, the Americans need to come here and explain Brexit to you all. But it's basically, if I could just kind of reduce it down, right? So you've got the referendum and the voters. So you almost can think about as the voters like the users, and the referendum is the product, say for example, or the brand. Interaction, right? Came together on a certain day, cast their vote, and then you had basically two outcomes of that, possible outcomes of that. Brexit passes, Brexit fails. And of course we all know what the outcome of that was. Now, I want to describe some important characteristics of outcomes. So I'm going to call for a group of people, right, Brexit passing, right, that was an outcome goal for them, right? Why are you showing up to the poll and why are you casting your vote? Well, I want Brexit to pass, for example. Important characteristics of that, I believe, are, notice it's an output of a specific interaction, right? So there's a referendum and users, and you could say, okay, they're coming together at a certain time and date, and that's the interaction, and then there's a particular outcome of that. Also, is notice how there's a clear start and end of that interaction, right? So Brexit passing mattered only for that one particular day. Right? You could argue maybe people were anticipating it and it was important up before then, but really it mattered on that day. Right? And then afterwards, it didn't really matter so much if one vote went one way or the other for a group of people because it already happened. So that's the outcome goals. Now, does this really describe, though, what these people wanted? I mean, you could argue, yeah, well, they wanted the referendum to pass and they wanted the UK to leave the EU. That's what they wanted. But is that really, what they wanted? Well, luckily, we know people have gone out and asked them, well, why did you want the referendum to pass? And two of the big reasons they said were decisions about the UK should be taken in the UK. And also, UK has control over immigration and its own borders. These are a little different, I think, right? It's like, are these the outputs of a specific interaction? right? Or is there a really clear, defined start and end, right? Is there, well, immigration control matters on Monday, but not on Tuesday, and then maybe it matters again on Friday? I don't think so. I think, and I consider these environment goals. So using control over immigration as an example, let's kind of unpack some of these characteristics of an environmental goal. So it's describing an attribute of a state, meaning that as long as it's important for me to have a particular vision of how I think UK should be, control over immigration is going to be irrelevant to me. Right? So it's describing the attribute of the state. As long as that state is important to me, that goal is going to also, by necessity, be important as well. The other thing, there's no defined start and end, right? As I mentioned before, it's not like control over immigration matters on Monday and Tuesday, but no other day of the week. And I like to visualize it this way in my mind, right? Think about kind of this barbell for outcome goals. Well, here's where it matters, here's when it matters, here's what doesn't matter. Whereas environmental goals, it's this process. It's always going, it's always relevant to me. All right, so I'm going to make the case that consumers really want the environments and not the outcomes. Now, generally speaking, I'm not going to say outcomes are never important, so on and so forth, but they're intermediary goals, and that really kind of what they're aspiring for in certain environments. So I'm going to prove that. This was a research project I did a couple of years ago with Arlo. So Arlo, the story here is Arlo had established itself as a number one brand product for the consumer home security market. In fact, they probably kind of created that market. And as often happens, right, when someone creates a market that is very lucrative and grows, it attracts competition. So they reached out to us and they said, okay, we have to grow our product. We have to get more people to buy it. We also want to stimulate innovation, right? How can we find more growth opportunities for us? And also, how can we fight against the competition? Help us stay ahead of our competitors, who we know are going to come on in and do their best to steal our customers. So that's what we did. My team and I, we went in and we started talking to people who had recently purchased these Arlo cameras. And at first, the Arlo team was a little confused by what we were doing, because we weren't asking about the product at all. I mean, a little bit, but most of the conversation was about other stuff. The Arlo team was like, okay, how easy was it to set up? Ask them what it was like to set it up. Or, okay, the picture quality. To ask them what they want the picture quality and like what it's supposed to show and not supposed to show. Things of that nature. But that's not what we talked to them about. We started asking them questions like, all right, before you were using the Arlo camera, what else were you using, right? What did the Arlo camera replace for you? Or, and this is a magic question, now that you have the Arlo camera, what can you do now that you couldn't do before? How has your environment changed? This is also another great question to ask your customers to really get at what they're trying to get to. And that's saying, okay, compare you with the Arlo camera of today and how you were 3 months ago when you didn't have it. Let's compare and contrast those. As we asked these questions more and more, the Arlo team started to get it. We started understanding that what we were driving at was what was the environment that these consumers were trying to create and maintain for themselves. And so we came across two types of, actually multiple environments, but for this talk I'll keep it to two. So one environment that we call protect and defend, and the other environment we'll call care and aware. So some attributes of the protect and defend, things like I can work with my neighbors to fight crime. I know who is in and around my house. Criminals don't see my house as a target. So that's things of that nature describe the environment of what it feels like, the experience of protecting and defending my home. What about care and aware? Things like, we heard things like, well, now that I have this camera, I can keep an eye on my kids while I'm away. Right? I know that they're okay. Some people talked about being really excited about knowing what kind of wildlife was on their property. A lot of people we talked with lived in the Midwest of the United States, and so they loved seeing turkeys and deer and things of the, other little wildlife creatures kind of roaming around their property. Other thing was, well, I want to always know about a gas or heat or water problems going on. Right? So if it's a gas leak, I want to know about it right away. If someone left a window open and that's causing the air conditioner to work overtime, use up lots of energy, temperature drop problem, I want to know about that. And then another one, which I really liked, was I want my home to welcome me when I arrive. So these were the characteristics of this environment that they were hoping to experience and create and maintain for themselves. So armed with this new thinking, they did some improvements to the camera, right? But they were now able to abstract and think about opportunities outside of just their camera. So, like for example, they started creating multi-sensors, right? That you could just pop around your house. And you could have it check for moisture, water leaks, gas, carbon monoxide, temperature, light, motion, things of that nature. And then they also thought about, okay, now how can we adjust or make changes to the app? So, like for example, here is one really important change that they made was, like, the old way was people would complain about getting all these notifications, right? Like every time the camera would see motion, it would pop up, motion detected. What do you want to do about it, or anything? I guess nothing, right? Apparently. And then and then people would complain, oh, there's too many notifications. And so the team thought about, okay, well, there's a sensitivity that we'll add them. So, that's how they control the amount of notifications. But once they recognized that it was about a particular environment, they could actually create more meaningful push notifications. So they did something really cool, which is match it, for example, with facial recognition. So instead of saying motion at the front door, and then like, oh, what is that? Oh, okay, not important. They would say, the mailman just came, or not. Or you could say, Michael just got home, or just left, like your son, or so. Or things like, unrecognized person has been detected. So now you're creating more meaningful push notifications to people, and also, not directly responding to their complaint about too many notifications. So that was one really big change to the Arlo app. Another thing, right, the Arlo remote. This is what I thought was great. Again, tying it back to the experience of, well, whenever I come home, I want my home to welcome me. And so they came up with this thing, well, you can actually pre-program certain welcome home sequences, right? Oh, I like to have the driveway light up and the certain things, front door and so on and so forth. But also, we heard stories about, well, I also, when I come home, if there's any bad guys in there, I want them to be frightened away. So that's why they kind of have like security options here too. So it's kind of dual purpose, right? So I welcomes me home, scares away on the inside, but if that person is still inside, I can hit the warning button and call the police. And then another thing here is the Arlo siren, right? Strobe light, right? To put if it's an unrecognized face, right? Bad guy scene, shine a spotlight on them, make sure that they've been seen, but also a red strobe light, so to notify the neighbors. Right? So this is kind of also touching on that goal of help me work with my neighbors to fight crime. So this is kind of one way of notifying the neighbors, hey, there's something going on here, please respond. So The way that I like to think about this is, as a experienced designer, think about not just your product itself, right? But how might we create a constellation of products and services that work together as a system to create and maintain these environments that consumers are hoping to have. All right, so as I wind down, here are some do's and don'ts that I want to kind of leave you all with. Don't think of outcomes as what customers want. I'm speaking generally. Yes, I'm not saying outcomes are not important, but I probably should say only. Don't think of outcomes only as what customers want. Rather, think about environments, right? That's really what they want to get to, and these outcomes are really means to help creating and maintaining those environments. Another big don't, I believe, is study consumers in their current environments only. Instead, I recommend, study the environments that consumers aspire to create and maintain for themselves. I call it environment experience, EX. Maybe they'll catch on, who knows. This is me, like, I'm not a huge fan of the ethnography methodology and contextual, like embedded contextual design or research. I think that's good for usability and kind of like finding issues with your current product. But I think if you want to really figure out what kind of environments that they aspire to, you have to talk to them about that. It's a different type of research. Don't think of yourself as a problem solver only. Again, think of yourself as a gardener. Again, think back to what Schuhart was doing with his control chart, and the same thing for the customer journey map. You're not really being a problem solver in the sense of, okay, we've identified a problem, now let's go find the cause of it and solve it, right? Again, that's the billiard ball cause and effect model. That's going to be very difficult to figure out. Instead, like, what does a gardener do, right? Is a gardener really a problem solver, right? Or is she someone who has an idea in their mind of kind of garden they want to design for themselves, and they figure out, okay, what do I need to do to make sure this garden is thriving, right? What kind of soil content needs to be just right, sunlight, so on and so forth. She doesn't wait until the tomato plant dies before recognizing it needs more sunlight, right? She's looking at the sunlight, figuring out, okay, how much more or less do we need to add, and then adjusting like that. All right, so that's all I have. Thank you.